Hello everyone. Back again with recaps. Its wife. Before we get to the storyline,
the film opens with a gathering of youngsters clad in jail garbs working under the ceiling. They have all the earmarks of being digging openings in no place. While working in such antagonistic circumstances, a young man named Barbag deliberately gets nibbled by a snake to get away from the really difficult work. The scene then, at that point, slices to a kid named Stanley Yelmtat strolling in the road. Unexpectedly, a couple of tennis shoes falls on his head and wrecks him. He chooses to keep the shoes as his insane family is right now dealing with a solution for smelling shoes. Notwithstanding, coming back home, he is captured by the police on the doubt of taking the shoe. It turns out they have a place with a popular ball player named Clyde Livingston, who had given it to good cause. The police bring the kid back home and illuminate his family about the occurrence. Be that as it may, the Stanleys aren't stunned and they pin the hardship on a family revile. Stanley is then introduced to court and the adjudicator sentences him to 1.5 years confinement at Camp Green Lake, an adolescent detainment place. There, he is acquainted with the in-charge Mr. Sir. Mr. Sir is an extremely severe individual, and he cautions Stanley that there's no good reason for taking off from the camp since there's no water for a significant distance. He likewise discusses the venomous reptiles in the locale, which have obviously killed many individuals. Stanley is then given his uniform and told to dig 5 feet down and 5 feet in measurement ordinary to assemble character. Despite the fact that he shouldn't search for anything specifically, in the event that he ends up tracking down something fascinating, he could procure a free day. In the following scene, camp analyst Dr. Pendanski acquaints Stanley with a gathering of young men who go by the epithets X-beam, armpit, squid, crisscross, magnet, and Zero. Zero is generally quiet since he is the most youthful. Stanley replaces Barbag in the crew after he was hurried to the clinic before. At lunch, when Stanley uncovers that he was wrongly blamed for taking Livingston's shoes, Zero ends his quietness interestingly, amazing everybody. A flashback then uncovers that Stanley's extraordinary granddad Stanley had amassed a fortune in the securities exchange. However, at some point, he is ransacked by a lady named Kissing Kate Barlow. This sends him into a condition of shock and very quickly, he turns out to be totally poor. With no other decision, Stanley begins working at an European ranch, where he goes gaga for his lord's little girl. He looks for counsel from the neighborhood soothsayer, Madame Zeroni, on the most proficient method to prevail upon the young lady. Nonetheless, Zeroni lets him know that the young lady is absurd, so he ought to move to the US, all things being equal. Stanley gives it a decent thought, yet eventually, he dismisses the guidance and goes to inquire the young lady's hand in marriage. Sadly, the young lady's dad advises him to bring a gigantic pig as share in the event that he wishes to have a potential for success to wed his girl. Stanley again goes to Zeroni. Furthermore, she gives him a piglet, advising him to convey it up the mountain and make it hydrate from an improving normal stream. Stanley concurs and promises to visit Zeroni after he succeeds. He likewise vows to convey the delicate elderly person up the mountain so she can recover her solidarity and youth. At last, the pig develops greater in size and Stanley conveys it to the young lady's dad. In any case, as Zeroni had said, the young lady ends up being extremely absurd. She is presently unfit to pick either Stanley and another typical-looking admirer. Disheartened, Stanley chooses to heed Zeroni's most memorable guidance and embarks for America. However, all the while, he totally neglects to stay faithful to his commitment to her. This angers the seer such a lot of that she reviles his whole male heredity forever. Back in the present, Stanley becomes used to life in the camp. At some point, he finds a fossil and shows it to the guide Dr. Pendanski, wanting to get a downtime. Nonetheless, the advocate lets him know that the superintendent isn't keen on fossils. He likewise makes reference to that there used to be a lake here, and all the land around it had a place with the superintendent's granddad. The film then, at that point, streaks back to quite a while back when the superintendent's granddad managed the town. A man named Sam is seen selling onions. He has eyes only for a neighborhood educator Catherine, so he gives her a sack of onions free of charge. In any case, in return, she provides him with a container of peaches she picked herself. In the present, Stanley prevails upon X-beam and others, and they acknowledge him into their crew by giving him the epithet Stone Age Man. This is on the grounds that he is great at tracking down fossils. One evening, he gets a letter from his mom and chuckles as he peruses her accounts. Before long, Zero shows up there and asks what he is giggling at, conceding that he can't peruse. He then, at that point, demands Stanley to educate him how to peruse, yet the last option declines. saying that he gets depleted from digging day in and day out. At some point, Stanley finds an item looking like a shell packaging with the initials, KB. Tragically, X-Beam grabs it from him and gives it to the advocate to get the vacation day. The guide then illuminates the camp superintendent, who is uncovered to be a lady, about the finding. Dazzled by the item, she remunerates X-Beam and orders everybody to uncover his opening further. The film again streaks back 100 years previously. Sam visits Miss Catherine and offers to fix her spilling rooftop in return for 3 containers of her flavored peaches. Catherine concurs an additional time. The two develop nearer to one another. Notwithstanding, different men in the town additionally begin to show interest in her. One evening, a man named C hits on her, yet Catherine severely overlooks him. Weeks pass and Sam ultimately finishes her maintenance work, yet in spite of this, the two hang out. At some point, he assembles up the boldness to kiss her. Tragically, Trout Walker sees this and in an attack of desire, he tortures Catherine at school. At the point when the last option looks into this, she hurries to the neighborhood sheriff for help, however even he attempts to kiss her. He additionally tells Catherine that her dark sweetheart will be before long executed for the wrongdoing of kissing a white lady. Panicked, she hurries to caution Sam, yet it is past the point of no return as he is shot in his own boat. This sends Catherine into a condition of shock, thus she chooses to vindicate her darling's passing. Barely any days after the fact, she kills the sheriff, lastly gives him the kiss prior to leaving. After this, Catherine never thinks back and her excursion as a criminal starts. She proceeds to plunder rich dealers and landowners prior to executing them and saying goodbye to them with a marked kiss. This gives her the epithet, Kissing Kate Barlow. In the interim, after Sam's execution, it never rains in the town and the lake in the long run evaporates, delivering Trout Walker's territory useless. Back in the present, at some point, when Mr. Sir brings the young men water, Magnet takes a sack of seed from him. Sadly, Mr. Sir sees the missing pack and threatens to rebuff everybody. At the point when nobody moves forward, Stanley chooses to accept all negative consequences to save every other person. Mr. Sir takes him to the superintendent, wanting to get him rebuffed for the robbery. Be that as it may, the flighty superintendent reprimands Mr. Sir rather for diverting the kid from his digging. At the point when Stanley gets back to the field, Zero digs his opening as a method for saying thanks to him for saving everybody. Moved by the motion, Stanley offers to show him how to peruse and compose. As they hang out, Stanley draws an obvious conclusion and sorts out that the shell packaging he found before was all things considered a container of lipstick. It had a place with, in all honesty, Kate Barlow. Simultaneously, Zero likewise uncovers that his genuine name is Hector Zeroni. It's evident that the kid is connected with Madame Zeroni, who reviled the Stanley family a long time back. At some point, the in-charge figures out that Stanley makes Zero dig his openings. He chides the two of them for being pointless, and hearing this, Zero turns out to be maddened to the point that he smacks the man with a digging tool and takes off from the camp. Afterward, the superintendent and other camp authorities examine Zero's break. They foresee that he will not endure over 7 days. Since Zero is a vagrant, it is uncovered that his mom left him in a recreation area and never returned. Stanley hears the discussion and it profoundly disturbs him. Sometime thereafter, he reviews how his extraordinary granddad Stanley Yelnat I endure 16 days in the desert. Later Kate Barlow looted his cart. It turns out Stanley I made due because of a spot called God's Finger. Nobody knows where it is, on the grounds that Stanley I had gone off the deep end when he was at long last found. The next day, Stanley chooses to take off to save his companion Zero. Subsequent to strolling for hours in the desert, he at long last finds Zero resting under an old deserted boat. The last option uncovers that he endure on account of the containers brimming with peaches he saw as in the boat. It is obvious that the boat has a place with the late Sam. The young men then, at that point, notice a mountain somewhere far off which seems to be a human thumb. At the point when Stanley looks at it with the utmost intensity, it abruptly occurs to him that the mountain is God's Finger. Confident that they could track down something, the young men begin scaling the mountain, yet at the same partially through. Zero gets drained and can't move any further. Declining to abandon him, Stanley conveys Zero on his back and takes him up the mountain. This, unwittingly, satisfies his incredible granddad's vow to Madame Zeroni via conveying her extraordinary grandson. When they arrive at the highest point of the mountain, they track down the rivulet. They likewise find the onions that Sam became close to the water. In the meantime, back home, Stanley's dad at last tracks down a solution for smelling shoes, an answer of peaches and onions. Stanley is likewise announced blameless and the family's lawyer shows up at the camp to pick him. As it may be that the superintendent keeps the data, A0 recuperates and admits that Stanley wound up at the camp in light of him. Turns out it was Zero who accidentally took the tennis shoes from the cause sell-off, and at the point when he saw the police searching for them, he overreacted and lost them an extension. Due to Stanley's misfortune, the shoes ended up arriving on top of him. He is thankful as he figured out how to track down God's thumb. The film again streaks back to the past. Kate Barlow at last tracks down Sam's boat in the evaporated lake that has now transformed into a desert. As she sits without anyone else, recalling her late darling, Trout Walker and his significant other show up at the scene. Kate will not help them and on second thought commits the unimaginable by letting herself get nibbled by a yellow-spotted reptile. From that point forward, Trout Walker's ancestors, including the Flow superintendent, have been digging through the dried lake looking for Kate's fortune. Back in the present, Stanley and no revisitation of the field to search for the money box where he initially found Kate's lipstick tube. They in the end succeed, however. Right then, at that point, the superintendent and Mr. Sir show up and attempt to hold onto the storage compartment. In any case, they rapidly ease off when they notice that the yellow-spotted reptiles have moved onto the young men. The following morning, the superintendent is as yet trusting that the reptiles will disappear so she can take the chest. It would appear the young men are alive in light of the fact that the reptiles are opposed to the onions they have been eating. Sooner or later, Stanley's lawyer likewise shows up with the police. The superintendent blames the young men for taking her trunk. In any case, her cases are immediately rebuked when Zero notification, Stanley Yelnat, composed on the storage compartment. Subsequently, Stanley is permitted to leave with the storage compartment while the superintendent and her criminals are captured. It likewise at last rains in the desert without precedent for 100 years. Afterward, the young men head to Stanley's home, where they share the fortune similarly. Utilizing the newly discovered riches, Zero recruits a PI to effectively track down his mom, and it's uncovered that she also had been searching for him this while. The film closes as the young men become neighbors and welcome every one of the delivered camp children to visit.
Thanks to watching this video. Don't forget subscribe for more and like this video. Also add your comments. See you by next video.